This is the hour, the Steven hour, and yes, we are back with another 007 movie review, and today, ladies and gentlemen, we will be reviewing the 2012 Skyfall, one of the most beloved films of the franchise, and definitely a nostalgia for me, because this is the first Bond film I saw in the actual theater, so I have a huge love and nostalgia for this. Without any further ado, and of course, before we get into the cast, the plot, my personal thoughts, let's get into a bit of background. Now, before this film came out, it had been essentially a 4-year gap between this film and its previous one, Quantum of Solace, which, though was a huge success at the box office, critically was rather mixed. There were plans for a film to come out in 2010, which was, set between Quantum and Skyfall, but it never happened. And as a result, that kind of really delayed a lot of the plans a bit. And I think by this time, a new studio had now finally got the rights to distribute the Bond films. I think it was Sony, by this point. Hey, honestly, ever from Timothy Dalton's reign up to Craig, there's always been an argument on which studio is going to own the rights to distribute the Bond films, but Eon owned the rights to make and produce them. Distributing is really where the big marketing is, because the Bond series is such a huge franchise. Now, in 2012 was a great year to be a Bond fan. Why? Not only were we getting this film, it was set for the series' 50th anniversary. So with that, and I was in that year, and I can tell you, the hype was massive. The Bond cameo we had at the Olympic Games in that year was absolutely huge. The promotion for this film, the box sets for the special anniversary release, I immediately got me to around Christmas time. I bought it, and I watched all the films in preparation for this one. The hype for Skyfall was big, and the name of Skyfall for this Bond film was something that was rather interesting, because again, for the majority of the series, the names were taken either from Ian Fleming's novels / short stories, or sometimes they would create a name. But names like GoldenEye and License to Kill and The World Is Not Enough are derived from Bond mythology. But titles like Tomorrow Never Dies or Die Another Day had no correlated connection to the Bond series and was sort of made up. But this was interesting because it felt almost familiar, but we don't know. At least I didn't know. They had a completely new director for this film. His name was... the director for Skyfall was Sam Mendes. And already, this was interesting. This film was already going to be different. First off, it was to be released in the year of the series' biggest anniversary. Craig, of course, was back as Bond for a third outing. And the hype was massive for this film. But the question remains, how did this film do, and how is it generally perceived, and how do I feel about it? Well, before we do that, we need to, of course, head straight into the cast. The cast for this film, first off, like I said, Craig is back as Bond for his third outing. And honestly, when a Bond actor does their third film, the film itself is considered a series best, or has one of the best performances as Bond. And I definitely agree, Craig honestly gives his best performance as Bond. Judi Dench is back as M, and what's fun this time around is her character will play an absolutely bigger role in the film than she had in all the films prior. And she's essentially, in many ways, the main Bond girl for this film, kind of. Which is weird, but is both weird, but it kind of makes sense in a way, because if you really think about it, she is an established character, so she is kind of the Bond girl, but doesn't play the Bond girl in a traditional sense. But the story is more than ever revolved around her. The main villain we have for this film is Javier Bardem playing Raul Silva, a very beloved villain, and for the modern Bond villains, other than him, I would say Le Chiffre is arguably one of my favorite modern Bond villains. And he is absolutely... And honestly, he is great. He was great in No Country for Old Men. He was fantastic in that. So it made sense to have an actor that's known for playing villains to play a type of villain. And he is absolutely marvelous in the role. We'll explain more about his motivation in the film. but it's absolutely great. Other characters that we got for the film, we have, of course, Ralph Fiennes portraying the character of Mallory, who again will have a big role in the story. Other characters that are big, first off we have Naomi Harris as, I'm just going to say Eve for now, because her character reveal, I will say, was one of my joys when watching it in the theater. We also here have Ben Whishaw as a very important character, basically a beloved character from the previous Bond film being brought back to modern day. That's all I'm going to say. That's all I'm going to say. We have the character of Bill Tanner back again, portrayed by Rory Kinnear. Absolutely great that he's brought back. We also here have a very interesting character that comes into the very end of the film. The character, well, the actor's name is Albert Finney, and he plays the character of Kincaid. And basically, he has a connection to Bond. Interesting fact, there was always rumors that this character was meant to be portrayed by the first James Bond actor, Sir Sean, well, from the Eon films at least, Sir Sean Connery. But it never happened. Again, this is a rumor. It's never been fully confirmed, but that was always a rumor. But I'm glad that Connery never came back for this one, for this particular role. Don't get me wrong, I wouldn't mind if he did. But I feel that it would just, again, contribute to the Bond codename theory myth. Again, I was not in board on that. I always thought that either you had two things. A, chronological order, but the characters just always got plastic surgery every time the actors look different. Or the series just got a slight reboot with some mythology from the previous Bond actors' run still in the new incarnation. That's how I always viewed it. Other, of course, notable characters, well, kind of really more minor supporting characters, I should really say. We have, Benicio Marhol as Severine. Okay, I'm probably butchering those entire names, but she plays a bit of a minor role, and essentially is the villain's femme fatale type character. And then, of course, a minor character is, the villain, a sort of henchman type, Patrice, portrayed by Ola Passy. Again, I'm probably butchering most of these names, but it's kind of that. Now, this is really the main cast that really contributes to the film. And I liked how it's really a short cast, because honestly, if you stretch the cast for too long to have really other names, it kind of, for me, can kind of really ruin my enjoyment of the film. But either way, with that out of the way, let's hop straight into the plot. We begin this film, just like with the first three Craigs, really we don't open the film with the traditional gun barrel, but instead we do something kind of similar, but basically we see Bond, a silhouette of Bond, as he slowly walks up to the camera and whoops out his PPK and starts investigating, well, kind of investigating the room. Not really Bond, but then again, it feels more like Bond. And he's basically investigating this place where a fellow MI6 agent is being shot and is bleeding. I also find it interesting that he has a sort of earpiece in his ear, in Bond's ear, where he's being communicated with basically M and Bill Tanner, the Chief of Staff. And he's told to leave his fellow comrade there, and essentially to pursue the person, to pursue his target, who has stolen some kind of chip, a very valuable chip, that has a bunch of lists of agents, which is more important. And he hesitantly leaves. But even though Bill Tanner assures him that the medics are on their way to make sure that he will survive, he says, they'll be too bloody late. The person that happens to pick him up to track this Patrice character is a character called Eve, and it's basically a new rookie field agent. Eventually, they track down Patrice in his car, and it ends up flipping. He then gets out, and we have this really awesome gun battle. Eventually, police show up on motorbikes, which he ends up gunning them down and takes one of their motorbikes. Bond quickly gets out of the car and follows him by a bike chase. I love the cinematography, how it's going on the roof, and the camera angles is so coherently consistent and not too over the place. I'm enjoying this film. Something I honestly didn't quite get with Quantum. And if I could honestly say, I'm already hooked because there's a bit of mystery. There's an interesting character in Eve that is presented that I can't help but feel intrigued with. And the bike chase across the roofs is absolutely breathtaking. Eventually, and it leads into a building and then out onto a bridge, where Beatrice eventually jumps from the bridge onto an oncoming train. Bond follows. Eve then follows by a car as well. And I love how they are going by part by part by part by part by part of the train between Bond and Beatrice, eventually leading to the top of the train where they have an actual fist fight. It's been a while since, honestly, Bond has had a fight on the train. I think really the last time Bond had an actual fight on a train, if I recall correctly, I think that honor has to go to, I think, Octopussy. The last time Bond had a fight on a train. And I like how Bond is trying to keep up. He's using a bit of his wit. Again, kind of reminds me of Quantum. But he also gets shot in the arm. A bit of the shoulder. But he's still pushing forward. I think it's again a few times where we see Bond get shot and he's actually bleeding. He's which I don't think we've actually had. Eventually, the fight is it's getting rough. Bond's trying to get his hand on essentially this microchip, I guess you would call it, to get the list. Eve eventually gets to a mountainside, gets out essentially a rifle, and is preparing to shoot Patrice on the train. But it's getting closer to a tunnel and Bond is in the way, and she can't risk shooting Bond. M says, "Can you get a better position?" But there's no time. And she has to call the shot, say, take the shot. Eve is still hesitant, but then shouts, "Take the bloody shot." And she fires. It misses Patrice and hits Bond, and he falls off the train, off the bridge, because by this point the train's on a bridge, and falls into the water. And everything goes silent. And then you hear Eve's words, "Agent down." Patrice escapes on the train into the tunnel. Holy crap, that's one hell of a way to open not just a film, but a Bond film. And I like how everyone's just silent. We then go back into the water, we see Bond essentially still floating within the water, and then we get into the title song, Skyfall, sung by Adele. And this song is an absolute fan favorite, and I have to agree, it's one of my favorites. The song is just so engrossing. Adele just bellows it out. It's absolutely impactful. It's definitely way better than what Quantum did. The visuals, again, play a role in the story. And then we do get a bit of a callback to the classic Bond with the silhouette naked chicks, but I like how it's not the main focus, and it feels more, it has a modern feel, but a classic, but also there are, again, pictures and to foreshadow to telling of the story. And after that, I knew I was in for one hell of a ride. After that, we cut back to MI6, where it seems that M is writing, essentially, Bond's, I guess, memoir. And then eventually she is called to Mallory, who is a high-ranking official within the British government, and judging by the interaction, something tells me, my assumption is that M and the two really have either both a history or even a great deal of respect for one another. But they also bring up the incident of the missing chip, I guess you would say, where essentially it's been months since that, and there's been an inquiry over the stolen drive, and essentially she's being pressured to step down and retire. I can clearly tell to Mallory that he's acting professional trying to do so, and I can clearly tell that he just doesn't like doing this, to telling a fellow operative to step down. And this makes him very different from your average bureaucrat. And then again, when you have Ralph Fiennes in a role, you automatically got gold here. And I like the line that says, "M, you've had a great run. You should leave with dignity." And her line she says back is priceless. To hell with dignity. I'll leave when the job's done. It's absolutely fantastic. Fantastic dialogue from two such fantastic actors pulling it off. Absolutely great. It also should be noted that Mallory is a chairman of the Intelligence and Security Committee of Parliament, and We later will find out in the film that he used to be a former SAS officer, so essentially used to be a former agent, which I found really interesting, and really helps me produce on a lot of his character throughout the film. Eventually, as M and Bill Tanner drive, they then get essentially a call that someone is trying to hack into their servers and sends these taunting messages, which again is more of an update on these sort of terrorist thing, and it's clear that it's taunting mostly M, and someone's really targeting her. M allows, to try and see if they could track to see where it's going, and then they find out that it's somewhere within within MI6. They then pull on the side of the road, which happens to be near the bridge, because now that there's a big blockage where officers are essentially telling them not to move through, and eventually an explosion happens within the MI6 headquarters, which is in London at the time, real life, and a huge explosion. Oh my god. Automatically I'm hooked. There's a villain targeting M and all of MI6. That is something different, and again, more modern day with these cyber and terrorists. You could see this as, well, being too much up to date, but honestly, in espionage and that, spies would really be going after people like these guys. And the explosion really shakes a core. We find out, of course, we all then cut to a different place, where it turns out Bond is, of course, alive. Turns out that even though he was presumed dead, he's been living the life, almost emptyless. He just gets drunk, bangs a lot of girls, and repeats the same cycle. And he seems to have almost been comfortable with it, but also detached, as like life's left him. But then he sees on the news report that there was attack at MI6, which forces him, obviously, to come back, to realize that he was never dead. Second, we also get the scene where M is essentially at some kind of funeral, paying her respects to all these agents that were killed in the explosion. And I could see that within M's eyes with anger. Like I said, she's willing to send her agents to die. But like she said in GoldenEye, again, how she was in the Pierce Brosnan era is completely different to the Craig era. Both things have one thing in common. They are willing to send their agents to die, but not on a whim. And they are certainly, but even they have their limits on what is necessary. This wasn't. And again, fellow operatives are dead. Someone has to pay for this. She is then sent back to her apartment or hotel, well, I guess flat you would say, really, where she comes face to face with Bond. After learning about the attack, Bond is obviously back, but there's a bit of hostility between the two. Bond is mad at M for how she essentially, said to take the bloody shot, even though it would kill him. There's a bit of hostility there, and Craig and Judi Dench, absolutely fantastic in the scene. Again, I'm going to be saying how fantastic these two were, but they managed to pull these scenes off. So much drama there. Well, but, of course, I like how, also, as soon as she enters, she could see someone in the shadow, and she immediately knew it was Bond. And, again, you could see just how much Bond has really let himself go. Not that he's fat, but also, like facial expression-wise. He's growing a bit of a goatee. You can clearly tell he's been drinking way more than the average man should. But he just has, and he's really just let himself go. He's of course back, but he needs to do some physical exercise and all that stuff to tell if he's really fit for duty to be back on this case. And we also find out that his flat has been sold. Flat has been sold, basically how that he really has to find his life back. As a result of that, Bond essentially goes through a series of physical, medical, and physiological examination. And I like how it's clearly he's not doing well. He's lost his step. And I like this psychiatrist scene where he sits down with the psychiatrist and they do like this word play. Where basically, he says a word and you have to match it. Two really stick out to me. One, when the psychiatrist says M, the first word to come back is saying bitch. And I got a huge crack out of that. And I was not the only one. A lot of people in the theater, when I watched this, we laughed the hell out of that scene. But another scene also really got me intrigued. When the psychiatrist said Skyfall, he froze and then left. And I like how throughout that scene, Mallory was also watching. clearly being a participant in all the occurrences. And again, I'm wondering, what's Skyfall? There's got to be something about this title, that name, that really draws home to Bond. Of course, Bond is, says that he's passed all the tests, and Mallory and Bond also gets reacquainted with Eve, who turns out after the events of that, she's no longer a field agent and was sort of kind of desk duty, and is wanting to get back into the field. But Bond says the field is not for everyone. Clearly, just telling her that it's not a bad thing that you're out of the field. And it's also told that she's now been the secretary to Mallory. Again, nice fun thing there. And again, Bond and Mallory kind of don't get along at first. Bond at first. And Mallory is saying, why did you come back? You could have just stayed dead. No one gets out of this alive. You had one of the best opportunities. Bond says, hire me or fire me, it's up to you. And M clearly trusts Bond. It also should be noted that early in the film, just like I said on that train, Bond got shot. Well, he managed to finally get the bullet out from his shoulder and had the bullet examined. Finding the likely assassins who did it, recognized one, Beatrice, and turns out the CIA had been after them. Realizing that he is the possible link, he has to go and quickly find him. And of course, they manage to track down location, which happens to be in China. But M gives him a few instructions. Interrogate him, find out everything they know, and then execute him for the death of their agent in the beginning of the film. And Bond says with pleasure and leaves off. And Bill Tanner then looks and says, I can't believe Bond passed all the tests. And M says, he didn't. And I get a crack out of that. Clearly telling that M trusts Bond, an agent, out of his, probably a few steps back, out of his depth, and clearly not be able to keep up, trusts that kind of agent over the newest, more physically fit. Goes to show. Bond eventually makes his way to China, which I think is the first time in the series Bond was actually in China. They tried to do it several times in previous films, but they always went to a different Asian area, not China. So this is the first time, and it's beautiful they get a chance to do this. Bond eventually meets up with Patrice. It turns out is apparently on attempt of a contract hit. But before that, he has to quickly get some gadgets. Now, I said before that there was a character that was essential to the plot. A character from the old Bond series returning. And I was keeping him a mystery because I was shocked that they brought him back. The character Ben Whishaw plays, he reveals who he is. But first, he has to give Bond some... They do the classic code word. And it turns out that Ben Whishaw's character he's playing in the film is our beloved Q. Yes, ever since honestly Die Another Day, it had been a long time, nearly 10 years since the character's return, and he's brought back. Of course, being updated, instead of being an old, Desmond Llewellyn was, he's more of a young, tech-savvy type. The gadgets he's gotten is a special radio for distress, and of course a gun that can read his palm, meaning only he can fire it. We get a nice little quip between the two, and of course, Q released with saying his most famous line, "Please return all the equipment in pristine order." It's fun just to hear that line again. And us hardcore Bond fans, we were happy about that. Again, but back to the film. Bond eventually catches up with Patrice, who turns out is doing the contract hit. Bond eventually gets into a fight, and it's well choreographed, and the silhouettes work so well. Eventually, he shoots out a window, and he hangs Patrice by the hand, trying to get him to talk, but he ends up slipping out of his hands and falling to his death. Bond is mad. But he does get a few clues, such as a token, which is to a casino, which he goes to, but he also sees a woman across the building. But before he went to the casino, he's in some kind of hotel room where Eve meets up. He gets a nice shave, and basically the two talk. A bit of Mallory's past is revealed between the two, and it's also implied that they might have slept together. And this will be important, as it is a common belief / fan fiction for a certain character, which of course I reveal Eve's real name at the end of the film. Eventually, Bond makes his way to this casino, and it's gorgeous looking. It really is. He gives the chip, gets his payment, And he ends up talking to this woman, the one's name that I clearly butchered earlier in the film, the villainous femme fatale. It turns out that she was a former product of the human sex trade. And the two essentially discuss. It's clear that they intend to bump off Bond, but he promises to save her from his recent employer if she agrees to help him take to the main villain's location and essentially find out who it is and basically stop. And she's clearly willing to go along with it and leaves. But just as Bond is leaving the casino, he gets cornered by the thugs or bodyguards that were following her. This results in a fight, a very fun, entertainable one, and the good payoff is when one of the thugs get the gun, it won't work, but it turns out the thug is quickly attacked by essentially a Komodo dragon. Yes, you heard me right, a Komodo dragon. See, in the casino underground, below, there's like Komodo dragons, kind of for show, clearly for tourist reasons. Bond leaves and whips off with the quip, "Circle of Life." Bond then makes his way to the boat that the girl is on, and the two leave off, and, they're pretty much, in the Bond fashion, spend the night, They eventually make this way to this island rock, which is a real-life location at the time that was sort of a deserted island. I like how that's really used for a villain base. Bond then makes his way, captured by gunpoint, I should rather say, to the main villain's lair, and it turns out to be Raul Silva. And there's this really fantastic opening dialogue. It's one of the most epic villain entrances for modern Bond, and this monologue that Bardem gives is absolutely fantastic. It's also revealed that Raul Silva used to be a former MI6 agent, and not just that. Before Bond became M's favorite, he was M's original favorite, and he clearly wants revenge for what M apparently did. And it's also shown that he's a cyber terrorist and does all this for his own benefit. He tries to intimidate Bond and show that they're kind of similar, but also very different. Eventually, he takes him to essentially a duel, where the woman before is tied up and has a shot glass placed on top of her head. And if you miss, the glass that was poured into the shot was a drink that was first released. Well, that was released. It said 1962, and we fans should know what that year was. That was Dr. No came out, the first Bond film. Nice, little, and very subtle reference. Not the over-the-top, in-your-face we got in Die Another Day. And I like this duel scene, and Bond misses. And I like how Raul Silva was constantly saying, "Did you really die that day? Does any of the old 007 left?" And again, Bond misses, doesn't want to kill her, so what does Silva do? He raises his guns and shoots her. And the glass falls on the ground. And he says, "Well, I win. What do you say to that?" Bond gives the best line. "Well, that's a waste of good scotch." And ends up going into action, knocking out one of the guards, taking the gun, and essentially ends up shooting them all. Gunned down, and has his gun hold at Silva. And he says, "Do you really plan to take me to M all by yourself?" But again, as we recall, he was given a homing transmission during the Q scene. So helicopters all arrive to take Raul Silva in. He's placed in the cell, almost gives us a vibe of essentially Silence of the Lambs with Hannibal Lecter locked in his cell as M comes to visit and talk to him. But it also gives me a kind of Dark Knight vibe when Batman's interrogating the Joker. Again, I like to think that a lot of Raul Silva's character was slightly inspired by the Joker, a little bit. We also find out that he did a job for M, but was also implied he kind of went rogue. And when he was captured, he refused to talk or give up. But what he didn't know, he was actually sold out by M to have a peaceful transition. Realizing that M wasn't going to come and how M sold him out, he tries to do the classic, spy, cyanide, try to kill himself. But what ended up happening was it didn't work so well. So what happened is it ended up disfiguring him. And he has this kind of thing in his teeth that covers up the disfigurement. So now he wants revenge on M for selling him out. In his mind, he did nothing wrong. He was serving his country and was sold out by M. And everything he's doing is to get back at her. And for a while it looks like they stopped the threat. M reveals everything that happened to Bond, and he and M and Tanner go to this inquiry where Mallory is also there, along with many high-ranking officials, and they are giving M a bit of a scolding at all the incidents that have happened. Q and Bond are deciphering Raoul's laptop, and as they're going through, some virus gets uploaded and causes some kind of emergency protocol. Bond makes his way to the cell, realizing that what Raoul was doing, gets there, and turns out Raoul's escaped, killing one of the security guards, and follows where clearly an escape hatch Raoul Silva went through. But it turns out it's going through some kind of underground railroad, and Q, on communicator with Bond, is saying how he's planned this. Everything of this was all planned. It's a bit illogical, but it is what it is. Eventually, he makes his way actually into the subway, onto a train, underground railroad. This whole sequence is building up to this point where we're also getting cuts to Bond or to M at this conference kind of thing, or inquiry actually. And just as M's constantly getting scolded, Mallory comes to his defense and say, "Please, may we actually hear what the witness has to say?" And I like that. And instantly, the head of the inquiry agrees with him, clearly telling that Mallory clearly has quite a lot of pull on the committee. A really interesting character here. And again, M gives her speech on how times have changed. The old school ways are the old baddies, they're not as obvious anymore. They're more in the shadows, behind the scenes. We have to update ourselves. But also, again, inquiring is the 00 section still truly necessary to this day. Again, while this is being cut, we can see that Bond is trying to get his way back up to the roof, clearly telling that he's after M. And also, Silva has also used the time to dress up in policeman's clothing, where he goes with the crew, clearly going to assassinate M. Interesting thing here, clearly telling how he's been preparing this for his entire life, for his entire time, been planning this whole thing out. And then this speech M gives, essentially it's this poetry before she ends her defense, saying that it was a thing from her late husband. Clearly and I like how they say that she was once married, and implying that clearly he passed away, clearly of old age, and judging the fact that she remembers that poem, clearly tells how much she really loved her husband. And this poem, it's being intercut with both Bond and Silva racing to kill M. And as the poem ends, Silva bursts into the room with his men and begins shooting. Just as he's about to shoot M, Mallory jumps to her defense and takes a bullet for her. Eventually, Bond makes his way and results in both Bond, Mallory, and even Eve having a shootout, resulting in saving M from being killed and killing all of Silva's men. Silva quickly makes his escape and drives off. Bond manages to take M to a nearby car and they quickly drive off. Clearly seeing that they've been behind in the game, they need to get out in front, and as a result, they know the best way to do that, to lure Silva out, is to essentially use M as bait for a trap. M agrees, even though she doesn't like the plan, she knows it's their best option. Bond puts in a call to Q to tell him to place a false trail to their location, or where they're going, in order to lure Silva out. Q realizes this is a bold plan, and probably one that may backfire, but they have no other alternative. Just as that's happening, Bond pulls over and decides to switch cars, where they get out of the modern day, government-regulated cars, and go into a very familiar car that all hardcore Bond fans are familiar to. The classic Aston Martin DB5. And when we saw that in the cinema, my jaw dropped, because I thought they would never bring this car back. And they end up driving off to a location where Bond says, "We will have the advantage." Q and Tanner are helping lay crumb trails to lure Silva out. Then Mallory comes in and gives a suggestion on how to do it. And honestly, this is where I'm convinced that Mallory is really one of the good guys. Sure, he may be a bureaucrat on the outside, but inside he is a former agent and is a really good man at heart. And where is this location that they are placing the trails to? Why, good old Scotland. And it's revealed that Scotland is actually Bond's home. Even though he's loyal to England, His roots are in Scotland, and this is a true reference because when Ian Fleming created the character, and Sean Connery being the proper first actor to play him in the Eon film series, he didn't like Connery at first, but then grew to appreciate and even love his portrayal and it got to the point where in the book Ian made it that Bond's heritage is in Scotland. And as a result of that, it is now like for the character in the book, Bond was originally from Scotland, orphaned at a young age, then left, eventually joined the Navy, got recruited into MI6 and became a spy. That's the book version. In this film, they establish a few things. First off, Bond is from Scotland, and it was said that orphans always make the best agent recruits. As they're making their way to Scotland, they make their way to Bond's childhood home, and that home was called Skyfall. So here we come full circle to the name of the film. As Bond gets there, he meets the old caretaker, Kincaid, and they prepare for Silva to come to essentially get M, but they have very little weapons left. Nearly all the rifles have been sold off, but they end up booby-trapping the house, get their gun. Bond ends up using his old father's old hunting rifle in preparedness for the upcoming assault. We get this nice little fun scene between not just Bond and Kincaid kind of rebonding, but also understanding a bit of Bond's history. When Bond's parents died, he ended up locking himself in this room, and when he came out, the young boy was not what it used to be. He became a changed man after that, and eventually left the area. A nice little scene between Bond and M, reminiscing a bit before Silva and his men, or before essentially a large group of men come. And it's an all-frontal assault, and I absolutely love how it's all well done, choreographed. We even get the Aston Martin in on a bit of the action with the machine guns coming out. Now again, this car was clearly the one from Goldfinger, but the problem is in the reboot, they established that Bond had won the Aston Martin off a previous person. So there's a bit of inconsistency and a bit of plot hole there, but I can ignore it in all due good fun. As the fight goes on, M gets a little bit of a flesh wound, courtesy of one of the bullets, and Bond manages to shoot all the men, but he realizes none of them is Silva. But then they hear a helicopter in the background, along with some music, and Bond has to say the best line. He always knows how to make an entrance. And essentially, they use like the secret passage from the house, which is a tunnel, to lead out. Kincaid takes M out, whilst he prepares to blow up the building. Just as Silva and all the men surround the building and starts throwing explosives within the place, he ends up blowing up Bond's beloved car. And I like how Bond is pissed. You can do anything to Bond. You could target his boss, you could harm his friends, you could harm his girl, but don't you ever touch his car. He eventually Bond then essentially sets up an explosion that causes the whole building to explode and also takes out the helicopter, only leaving Silva and only 2 of his men alive. Kincaid and M manage to quickly get out of the tunnel and make their way to what looks like a nearby church. Bond has also managed to get out of the explosion, courtesy of the underground tunnel that he also took. But realizing that Silva and 2 of his men clearly see M and Kincaid making their way there, courtesy of what's left of the light, he orders his men to quickly follow. Bond manages to take out one of the henchmen and just as he gets close to essentially is an ice frozen over the lake, he is caught by Silva and one of his men, only for the ice to break with Bond and one of the men falling into the lake, but Silva turning his attention to M, thinking the 2 have died. Bond manages to kill the henchman, but as he looks up, he can't find his way out because only some of the ice broke, not all of it. So he quickly goes down to one of the dead henchmen, fires a flare, and starts swimming his way back up. He manages to quickly get out and makes his way to the church. M and Kincaid are already in the church, and just as Silva is about to make his way in, he notices a gravestone and walks by. The camera then zooms to that gravestone, and it's the gravestone to both Bond's parents. Clearly, we're about to step into the church, and essentially the final resting place to Bond's parents. Silva is in there, sees M at hold her at gunpoint, and points the gun at M's head and essentially Silva plans to blow both himself and M away to achieve his end. Kincaid can do nothing,
But just as Silver's about to pull the trigger, a knife is thrown in Silver's back by Bond, and Silver makes his way over to Bond's feet, and a line that was taken from the opening monologue between Bond and Silver, Bond says, "Last rat standing." Bond and Silver falls over defeated. But it turns out Silver won, as eventually M collapses and essentially dies from the mortal wound that she had suffered throughout the entire battle, and she dies in Bond's arms. So for the first time ever in the Bond series, the villain won. And then as we're getting closer to the end of the film, some things become full circle. We get this nice memorial of essentially M's passing. Though we don't actually get to go to the funeral, we get to see how like all these flags are up in her memory, and clearly see how Bond is really hurt that, really upset that essentially a mother figure of his is gone. And he has a nice little conversation with Eve on the rooftop. Eve gives him a present, which happens to be the last thing that M wants to give Bond, and it's essentially a little, I guess, statue of a dog. And Bond always hated that thing, but I guess it's a little feisty, little fun joke. Just as we go to this new office, where we're about to be reintroduced to the new M, Eve reveals who she's been this entire film. And that is that her full name is Eve Moneypenny. I was shocked when I heard that in the theater, like many of us. Now, people said they saw this coming a mile away. Well, I was one of the few that didn't, and I think a good chunk of us didn't see this coming. I don't know how they managed to pull that off. And Bond says, well, look forward to our time together. Everything's coming full circle. Bill Tanner comes out of the new boss's office. Bond makes his way in, and it turns out Mallory has just been promoted to the new M position. Mallory gives Bond a new mission, and just as we're hearing the subtle theme tunes of the Bond thing being played, Bond says, "With pleasure, M. With pleasure." And then we end the film with the classic gun barrel. But unlike Quantum that came out of nowhere, this was humongously built up. And here's is where we end the film. Skyfall was one of the biggest huge hits of 2012. It is one of the series' highest grossing films of the franchise, and it's often in top 10s of greatest Bond films. And I have to agree, it is an outstanding film. Absolutely great cinematography. New things were done here. Bond being presented as an old dog trying to regain his step, but also how Judi Dench's M is brought more into the story. And honestly, she is truly the main Bond girl of the story. We give a really very interesting and honestly quite a sympathetic villain. He wants revenge, for in his mind he did nothing wrong, but M sold him out. That is a very sympathetic villain that I think we've rarely, if ever, gotten in a Bond film. Some of our fan favorite characters have returned. Moneypenny, Q was back, we got a brand new M, and I like how we get to see this M develop in the film. We get to see both, honestly, his unlikable qualities, but also his very great qualities. And as a result, he will make a perfect replacement of M. I like how we get some closure with Judi Dench's M. This version of her character is put to rest, in a way, and she left behind truly a great legacy in the Bond series. Craig gives his best performance here. And I think this is also one of the greatest films because we get to explore more about Bond. Again, throughout Craig's entire tenure, we explored Bond. Casino Royale and Quantum, we explore him being a rookie, becoming an agent. Becoming the pro Bond agent we all know him to be. In Skyfall, we get to know more about his backstory, a bit about his heritage, and basically what made him the man he is today. And I loved every minute of that. Now, there are some things that need to be addressed. There are some plot holes and inconsistencies here that really shouldn't be here. But I get really the reason why. Because it's the 50th anniversary, and you got to suspend your disbelief for films like this. These are in order to enjoy it. And I can do that because, honestly, it's so enjoyable, and you don't really think about it until having a couple of re-watches, to be honest, where you really notice this thing. I didn't notice the first time I saw this in the movie theater. And yeah, I do notice the plot holes now, but I didn't really get bothered by it. I also like the idea of Bond being portrayed as an old dog. You know, he's lost his step and he has to regain it. That is something completely different. Bond being called old and essentially a relic and prefers the old ways compared to the new ways. Something actually unique for this series, how they are addressing that. Now, if you look at it from the Craig films only, this is his third film and he's already told he's an old dog, yet by his first film, he was already a rookie. This can be a bit incoherent, but I like to look at it as the film series as a whole. Again, this film came on the series' 50th anniversary, so it made a lot of sense to essentially say, well, Bond's old. So I'd like to think of it that way, rather than it being just the Craig film only. But I really wish a film should have come out in 2010, maybe to make this not so much of a glaring plot hole. And yeah, I also like how there's the message of, are the old ways still, like old versus new, and are the old ways still relevant by today? A great interesting message there, and honestly, this film is truly a masterpiece in really bringing Bond back, and honestly, this was one of the most successful films of the franchise. I love this film. And there we have it. That was my review of Skyfall, an absolutely great film and a great classic in the franchise. Now, when this film came out, it was huge. One of the biggest films of the franchise, growing over $1 billion, outgrossing Thunderball, which was considered the most commercially successful Bond film. It got an Oscar award for Best Song by Adele, Skyfall. This film was everywhere in 2012 and really brought Bond back into the relevant mainstream, something it hadn't had since the 60s. And again, even though the Craig films, like Casino Royale, even though it was a big success, I wouldn't say it was it was a massive worldwide phenomenon. Skyfall was, and it is Craig's best Bond film by a mile. After this, the film had finally reached its peak, and new things were ahead. Again, what the Craig films are famous for was they're always trying to redevelop, or always do something completely different. So for the next series installment would be 2015's Spectre, which will be the next film in this series review. So until then, this has been The Hour, the Steven Hour, and so long for now.